Hello and welcome to another exciting lecture for methods. In this lecture, we're going to talk about a very relevant topic to what is going on with our labs, and that is surveys and observations. So first, we will define surveys, questionnaires, and polls. So you should be able to define those by the time we're done with this. Then we will look at question formats, and you should be able to compare and contrast the different question formats. Then we're going to look at utilizing the techniques to writing well-worded questions, not to speaking well-worded sentences, but writing well-worded questions. Then looking at some ways to get accurate responses. We'll first look at explaining why participants give inaccurate responses, and then we'll look at utilizing the techniques to get participants to accurately respond. So right into this first learning objective, being able to define surveys, questionnaires, and polls. So the basic thing is they all mean roughly the same thing. That is a way of obtaining self-reports of behavior. In any self-report type of response, it doesn't just have to be behavior. It can be thoughts, it can be feelings. You can go about it a bunch of different ways. You can use an interview where you can just interview someone and then write down their responses. You can call them on the phone. You can have them do written responses, online responses. Doesn't matter how you go about getting the responses. The point is a survey is going to basically be all about self-report. So the participants are going to report whatever it is that you're measuring. Questionnaires are mostly used when people are providing written responses. Poll is mostly used when people are asked about their views. And a survey is a general term, and it can also be used as a verb to just mean you're administering a survey. You're asking people survey questions. So you're going to, for your lab in here, you're going to be doing a survey, but it's technically a questionnaire because people are providing written responses. Now let's look at comparing and contrasting some of the different question formats. So there are a couple different types of formats you can ask and stuff like this. The first thing you can do is you can ask something like an open-ended question. What do you think of this class? Now you guys aren't going to be doing this for your surveys, but this would be more of one where you're just trying to get general responses, general feedback, general answers. So you might be looking for keywords in their responses. I will tell you open-ended questions are really difficult to do. They're really difficult to code. That's why we won't be doing them in this. Another type is forced choice. Yes or no questions. Do you like this class? Yes or no? So forced choice is basically forcing people to choose between two different answers. Now, when you do forced choice, you can sometimes have a yes, no, and I don't know. So it's not as much of a forced choice as the person has to answer yes or no. Sometimes you can put in an I don't know. But that's a third option that isn't necessarily always going to be there. The next, though, and this is what you guys should be focusing on, with the exception of your demographic questions. Your demographic questions are going to be forced choice. What is your gender? What is your race? Things like that. Those are forced choice questions because you've only got a limited amount of choices. Then the most of the questions you're going to be doing are going to be Likert scale. So this is where you'll have a number of different choices that form a range. It could be a frequency, a magnitude, something like that, but you've got a number of different choices that form a range of responses. So a question example would be, this class is easy. Do you strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree? So in this case, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 responses. Typical Likert scale is 7-point, meaning there's 7 possible responses. You can also do 5-point so there's 5 responses. So in the case of what you see here, strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, you could do strongly agree, agree, neither agree nor disagree, disagree, and strongly disagree. There are problems with having a middle question that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it is one of those where it's something you kind of have to deal with when you're doing something like this. And then the final is semantic differential format, where you anchor ratings with adjectives. Such as on one end is easy, on the other end is hard. And this is very similar to Likert, and in some ways it's similar enough that you can do this as a question format in your survey if you feel like it. I prefer you use Likert, but this is another way to do Likert scale without having each number represented by a label. You've only got the two ends represented by label. So you could use this strongly agree and strongly disagree. You could put that on this spectrum, just put strongly agree on the right and strongly disagree on the left, or the other way around. And that's one of the things we'll talk about later, is how you can do them in reverse order and how important that is. Okay, open-ended questions, really easy, really simple. Like, what's the name of the most meaningful long-term non-academic goal-directed activity you were involved in? It's a really complex question, or a really convoluted question, the way they ask it. But the point is an open-ended question is going to have, like this, it's going to have a box where you can put in a longer answer. It might just be a word. It might be 2 words, but it might be sentences. It might be paragraphs. You guys, like I said, are not going to be doing these for this class. They're too hard to code, too hard to run statistics on. Again, forced choice, things like demographics are great for forced choice, but other questions you might have forced choice too. In forced choice, you can have typically 2 or 3 answers in a forced choice. Sometimes you can have more. Like when you're asking demographics, you can have a whole bunch of different answers, but most of your forced choice ones are going to have 2 to 3 answers. And you're pretty limited in the amount of forced choice questions you can ask on your survey. You need to do Likert scale for the most part, but you can do a couple forced choice. You've got your demographics, and you can do 1 or 2 forced choice beyond that, but then you really have to start looking at those Likert questions. But again, this is, what's the example here? How many older siblings do you have when you're growing up? 0, 1, 2 or more. So you see how there's these forced choice options. And this is, again, this would be counted as a demographic question here. Likert scale, as was said, this is one way to do Likert scale. The way that is modified with the semantic differential format. But in this case, you've got a spectrum from strongly disagree to strongly agree. That you see that this is a 7-point because there's 1 through 7. Now you could label all these. You don't have to label all these, but you could label all these. Which you could go with disagree, slightly disagree, neither, agree or disagree, we've got slightly agree, and agree. And the nice thing with Likert scale is you can just put this statement at the top. Please indicate the extent to which you agree with the following statements. And then you can make multiple statements that use the same scale. Now, we'll talk in a little bit about how you should occasionally flip up. So maybe have some of your questions have this scale and some of your questions have 1 as strongly agree. And you should also flip some of your questions here such that some of your questions are asking positive directed questions and some are asking negative. What do I mean by that? I mean, how much do you like this class would be a good question. How much do you dislike this class? Or, sorry, since we're doing strongly agree to strongly disagree, one would be, I like this class. And another type of question that would be similar would be, I dislike this class. That way you've got some reversed questions. Another example of a Likert scale, this time in a 5-point. To what extent did you make progress in achieving this abstract goal? No progress, slight progress, moderate progress, great progress, and achieved it. So you see, this is a Likert scale where it doesn't go from like disagree to agree. It goes from basically 0 to 100%. So it's a instance where you can look at this 5-point where you can still have a scale of how much has been done, how much someone is on a specific variable, a specific question. This gets us to learning objective 3 and utilize the techniques to writing well-worded questions. Two statements here. Are you in favor of Joe Biden's Green New Deal, an environmental program that will increase taxes and unemployment? Or are you in favor with Joe Biden's Green New Deal, an environmental program that will provide jobs for all Americans and prevent global warming? You see that these are basically asking the same thing. Are you in favor of Joe Biden's Green New Deal? Then it just explains what an environmental program. Then it just explains what they are perceiving, the person asking it is perceiving that it's going to do. So these are two questions that are, again, essentially asking the same thing, but asking it in two very different ways. So as a result, you're going to get two very different responses. So the first thing you should do when looking at writing good, well-worded questions is avoid these leading questions. Leave it at that. Don't add the leading bit on the end. Just leave it. Are you in favor of Joe Biden's Green New Deal and environmental program? Easy. You don't have anything leading. You're not directing people in a certain direction. You're not basically eliciting things that you're not looking for. You're just asking the question. So what was the speed when it made contact with the wall, and how fast was the car going when it smashed into the wall? So again, at the same time, these are asking the same thing, but what was the speed of the car when it made contact with the wall is avoiding a leading word. And that leading word is this word right here, smashed. When you hear the word smashed, our minds automatically are going to increase the speed because things only smash when they're going fast. So when we add the word smashed into this, how fast was it going when it smashed into the wall? We're going to perceive it as going faster than if we just said what was the speed of the car when it made contact with the wall. Next one to look at, double-barreled questions. So double-barreled questions are basically questions that are asking two things, not one thing. And the problem here is, how is your participant going to respond if they disagree on the two things? For example, I like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. So what if someone likes pina coladas but doesn't like getting caught in the rain? What if somebody doesn't like pina coladas but likes getting caught in the rain? So now you have two separate questions being asked together. You should never ask two questions in one. And another example, I enjoy helping people and working hard in school. Again, there's a potential there for someone to not agree with both of those statements. So how does one then reply to this? Do they reply on the first statement, they enjoy helping people? Do they reply on the second? Do they think about the average of the two? So it's one of those where you really have to avoid asking two questions at the same time. However, I'll say this, sometimes double-barrel questions will work. I don't see any instances where you guys should be asking double-barreled questions in this class. But there are some times where researchers will do a great deal of testing, and if items have a strong convergent validity, then they will basically, you can ask them together. Like you see down here. I see myself as extroverted and enthusiastic, critical and quarrelsome, dependable and self-disciplined. There is a potential for someone to not agree with both of these. However, they normally go together. You're rarely going to find someone who's truly extroverted and not enthusiastic at the same time, which is why they ask these together, because they're actually looking for the enthusiastic extroverted people with this question, the critical quarrelsome people, the dependable self-disciplined people. So they're looking for people where both apply. And they could ask these separate, but that then doubles the amount of questions that people have to answer. And one of the things with surveys is you do not want too many questions. You actually want the questions to be relatively limited. So avoid double-barreled questions. So the next one is avoid negatively worded questions. So we've got this statement here. People who do not drive with a suspended license should never be punished. The problem with this negative wording like this is it can get confusing. We've got both do not and never in here. So we've got both do not and never. So it's something that we should try to avoid. However, very importantly, it can be very difficult to develop items that contain no negative phrases. So even though we've got this statement up there, and we can get better ways to say it, but the better ways to say it are still going to contain negatives. We could say people who drive without a suspended license should not be punished. We've got that there. We've still got negatives, but we've made it a little bit cleaner. But sometimes it's quite often difficult to get rid of all of those negatives. It's also difficult to develop items that are not somewhat leading, such as, and again, relevant, abortion should never be restricted, or I favor strong restrictions on abortion. This word restricted and these words never is a leading word. Strong is a leading word. However, with the way they're worded might be leading, but at the same time, they're done so that they get accurate representations of what people are looking at. So what ends up happening is researchers will ask about the same issues with multiple different questions. And you've got to do this with your survey to an extent. You've got to have multiple different questions that are asking the same thing in different ways, including some questions that are negatively worded, that are reverse coded. And then you can then from there test for internal consistency using those techniques we talked about before. And you may find that one or two of your items are really good and one or two of your items need to be tossed. That's perfectly fine to have items that you need to toss out later. You'd rather have too much than have to start your research completely over. In the end, though, may still be able to say something like, depending on how items are worded, roughly 25 to 40% of U.S. residents favor restrictions on abortions. So when you look at this, and as we're now seeing, it's actually lower than that. Besides the point, the point is we could say something like that, looking at it from the perspective of looking at multiple different questions and grouping them together. Another component to be concerned with when writing your questions is consider the question order, because one question can influence how later ones are answered. If you ask a question earlier on that basically keys people into a certain thing, then later ones are your participants are going to respond after being keyed into that thing. So it's a priming thing in psychology where various different topics can be primed. They're in your mind now, and now you're thinking about them. Because you're thinking about them, it can change your actual responses. So consider if you're worried about this, that you give some participants the questions in one order and other participants the question in another order. And for instance, in one study, they found that different people responded differently to two items depending on the order they were given. First off, do you generally favor or oppose affirmative action programs for women? And do you generally favor or oppose affirmative action programs for racial minorities? If they were given in the one order, then let's say asked women first, then they would be more likely to favor that and not the second one. If they were talked about racial minorities first, they'd be more likely to support that and not the women one. So it is one of those cases where the order matters. Even, again, relevant because voting's going on, people can be up to 5% more likely to vote for the first person they see on a ballot. So order of candidates should possibly be varied across ballots so that the candidate has the same number of people seeing them listed in advantageous and disadvantageous positions. It definitely happens that the first person listed does get up to 5% more votes. You see this less so in major votes, like for president, and more so in minor votes, such as ones where possibly the voter doesn't know all of the candidates and they just vote for the first two people listed. Which gets us to the next learning objective, and that is explain why participants give inaccurate responses. There is 3 reasons. First is that participants will respond in a patterned way, response sets. So when answering several questions, they might just, without reading the items or barely reading the items, just keep going with strongly agree, strongly agree, strongly agree. Another one is yay saying, where participants will consistently agree with questions because it's easier to answer the same thing again and again. So again, a strongly agree, strongly agree, strongly agree. Solution to this one and to this one to a lesser extent is to use reversed items. Even though that sometimes involves negatives. So use reversed items such that you are asking a question, but you're asking it in the opposite way. And that way, people don't just always do strongly agree. Maybe the one question should have been strongly agree, and the next one they should have responded, if they were responding the exact same, they should have responded strongly disagree. And another thing is people do fence sitting. This is where they'll play it safe and select a central neutral option. A solution to this is removing the central option, though I don't recommend it. This is only something that comes up when you're talking about things where people are going to be very iffy on, or people are going to be split in their opinion. For the most part, most of you are doing research that's not going to be an issue, and you'll get some people that'll put that neutral option in the middle, but most people are going to go on one of the two ends, not in the middle. So a example of forcing them off the fence is to get rid of that middle option, to do a 6-point Likert scale. If you feel like doing a 6-point Likert scale, you can. I wouldn't go lower than 6. So actually, I wouldn't go lower than 5. You can do a 5-point Likert scale or a 7 with a middle, or you can do a 6-point Likert scale without a middle question. So you see there's 6 responses here without a middle response, because the middle here is there's no option for that. So that's one of the things you can do. If you're worried about them being on the fence, force them off it by making no middle answer. As far as what you can do for social desirability responding, so social desirability responding is where the people will fake good or bad answers. Let's say you're asking something that's controversial, like even now, or I'm not even going to give a controversial topic because that's controversial in itself, and I don't want that just for a topic talking about surveys. But let's say you're asking a controversial topic, and it is socially desirable to answer in one way, but your participant actually feels another way. They're more likely to answer in the way that's socially desirable, the way that's would make them look good. So it's called faking good. And they're more likely to answer that way. It's actually something that's very common in surveys. It occurs frequently, and sometimes it's not even done because participants are doing it on purpose, like they want to make themselves look good. Sometimes participants are even fooling themselves. Example here, I will finally give an example. Example here is, how many past sexual partners have you had? There's actually gender differences in social desirability responses to this. Uh, Men will likely over-report their number of sexual partners. Women will likely under-report their number of sexual partners. And that's a social desirability responding, because they're responding in a way that makes them look better socially. Now, are they doing it on purpose, or are they doing it unintentionally? In some cases, they're doing it on purpose, but even in other cases, people are doing it unintentionally. Guys are more likely to consider sexual encounters that weren't actual sex to be a sexual encounter. Girls are more likely to consider a sexual encounter not an actual sexual encounter. So it's, again, we do it both consciously and subconsciously. Uh, some examples here. I never hesitate to go out of my way to help someone in trouble. Of course, people are going to say true to this, even if they wouldn't necessarily. I have never intensely disliked anyone. People are more likely to say true to that, even if they have at some point. On occasion, I have had doubts about my ability to succeed in life. I sometimes feel resentful when I don't get my way. Things like this, responding a certain way is what is socially desirable, so people are more likely to respond that way. How do you get around that? It can be adjusted with peer ratings. Promises of anonymity. This is why you have to make sure when they're given the surveys that the participants know that their responses are completely anonymous. It will not be tied to them. Another way is including behavioral measures. You can't do that with surveys. There's other things like 33 item scales. You're not going to be using that for in here, but there are ways that you can address this. Just be aware it is difficult to do. Just some other quick the issues that can come up with surveys. First off, again, because they're self-report, you can get issues that can come up because of more issues that can come up because of that. So first off, people generally have a good knowledge of their own feelings and current behavior. So as far as how you feel, how you currently behave, we're pretty good at that. So if you're asking things like that, then there isn't issues there. People may even have accurate memories of behavior in the distant past. Although the evidence is mixed, I do have to say that. People who were highly confident about where they were on 9/11 were no more accurate than people who were not confident. That is 100% the case, that we have many false memories. We have many inaccuracies in our memories. So you can't always trust self-report of memories, because people, they might be changing their memories. Related to that, causes of behavior people are actually pretty poor at. Even own recent behavior, even though you might know your recent behavior, the cause of why we behaved a certain way might not be. Interesting study done in 1977 showed that when women were asked to examine 6 pairs of stockings, all supposedly of the exact same quality, they generally preferred the last pair they examined. Why did they? So you could actually say, yeah, they bought the last pair, they preferred the last pair. That's their behavior. They're pretty accurate on that they got the last pair. However, why did they get the last pair? Well, they said it was because it was the highest quality. But in actuality, it couldn't have been true, because they all were the same quality. So cause of behavior, the cause of our behaviors, we aren't always knowledgeable of, especially causes of behavior even farther back than that. Like when we look at this, okay, going back into evolutionary psychology, because I like to give examples from it. It's commonly understood that people may say they are doing something for one reason, yet they may be unaware of the actual deeper reasons for the behavior. Example is I'm donating money because I like to help people. We could get into a long evolutionary lecture here, but in general, the actual reason why, and again, this isn't the conscious reason why, this is the ultimate reason why people are donating money is because we gain status when we donate money. So we actually get stuff out of doing stuff like donating money, unless you're truly doing it anonymously, but very, very rarely are donations truly anonymous. Now, maybe you do like doing it. I'm not faulting that. I'm not disputing that we like donating money to people. But the reason we like donating money to people is because we get something out of it. We get prestige. We get status. I like playing guitar because it allows me to express myself. This is a really interesting one, kind of funny one, but the reason why a lot of musicians say they like playing guitar is they like to express themselves. But when you actually look at the ultimate cause, and you can get musicians to actually boil it down and really think about it and really talk about it deeply and things like that, and you can boil it down to just about everyone who plays guitar started playing guitar to get laid. That's why they did it, because they thought it would make them look badass and they'd get laid from it. Again, that's not everyone, but that's just about everyone, and they might think it's to express themselves, and maybe they like expressing themselves through it, but really that ultimate cause going back is to get laid. Looking at just other things related, magicians supposedly force people to select card or numbers. Advertisement increase our desire for products when we don't realize it. It's coming down to, again, these things that are happening without us consciously being aware of it. That is what is resulting in the behaviors. So when you're testing the actual behaviors, that can work out really well because people are good with their behaviors. If you're actually testing people's logical reason why they did a behavior, you usually can't get that. Again, why did somebody order pizza? Did they order pizza because they were hungry, or did they order pizza because they just saw an advertisement earlier about pizza and that actually made them desire pizza specifically? So what is that cause, that ultimate cause? So another thing that can happen, another error that people can have is participants' ignorance. So surveys will sometimes ask people questions about which they have little or no knowledge. Then if they respond in any way other than just basically saying they don't know, then they're basically giving misleading information, because if a participant is confused about the question, if they don't understand the question, then they can't give accurate results. Some examples of that. Surveys about opioid misuse may be highly inaccurate because different researchers use different definitions of misuse, and participants may not bother to read the definitions. Example, over a third of high school seniors who reported non-medical Vicodin or Oxycontin use denied using opioids, even though those are opioids. Why? Because participants' ignorance. When they were asked, do you use opioids? They said no. Do you use Vicodin? They said yes. Those two can't be both true, because Vicodin's an opioid. The problem is they didn't know that Vicodin was an opioid. So because of the definition, because of what they understand, because of what they know, and it just comes down to the fact that they're going to give misleading responses. So it's why you need to be as clear as possible with your questions. Don't ask something that's general or can be misunderstood. Looking here again, many people don't know the difference between meth, a potential stimulant, and methadone. So methamphetamine and methadone, which is an opioid. And again, this causes people to respond in different ways to questions, and this is where your results can be inaccurate. Let's transition here at the end. We've been talking about surveys. We're just going to look at this and look at a couple examples of it. Just the last thing, and you won't be doing this for your studies, but it is something to consider because it's related to surveys, but it is where the researcher is counting things, where the researcher is observing the things. So, and this is where you can get more of objective view rather than the subjective view of the participant. If a observer is observing something, social desirability is not going to occur from the participant. So observational measurements are like self-report measures, and they can be used for frequency association and causal claims. And even self-report can be used for causal claims when used correctly. So just want to point that out if used with all of those other things we've been talking about in the last few weeks. Things we could do. We could count how many chicken wings people eat per visit, sit in a restaurant. Count how many chicken wings people eat per visit and whether this number varies by wing hotness. We could count how many chicken wings people eat if we experimentally manipulate bussing their tables or not. So again, here's where we can start to get a causal. Do people eat more if the tables are bussed or not? We could count how many times people smile when meeting a stranger. We could count how many times people smile when walking into a building in the morning or the afternoon. We could count how many times people smile if we experimentally manipulate the feedback they receive from a confederate. Again, now we've got a frequency claim, an association claim, a causal claim. We can do all of these with observational. Let's look at some examples. Many people in the media claim that during youth sports, parents give too much negative feedback to their players, opposing parents, and the referees. However, many parents would deny this. Self-reports wouldn't be helpful in resolving this because social desirability bias. Self-reports, the parents are going to say that they're not giving that much negative feedback or they're not giving any at all. A Bowker attended 69 youth hockey games and unobtrusively coded the comments that parents actually made, not what parents might remember or admit. And the parents made about 100 comments per game. If the parents were asked themselves, then they probably would have said only about 5 or 10 were made, but 100 comments were made. And surprisingly though, 96% were positive, so there were still 4% that were negative. 2% were directed towards referees, and 61% of comments were made by women. As a former athlete myself, who, when I was in high school, my mom and grandma came to my games, I can tell you definitely that they were making lots of comments, both good and bad. Another example, sex differences in words per day. So there's a stereotype that women talk more than men. Self-reports probably wouldn't be able to test if it's true. If you just asked how much do you talk in a day, you wouldn't be able to get it accurately because people don't actually know exactly how much. So in a study, they asked hundreds of men and women in the US and Mexico to wear electronic devices that recorded them. The device would record ambient sound for 30 seconds every 12.5 minutes. The researchers later then coded it. And turns out both men and women spoke about the same number of words per day, about 16,000 words per day. So there was no reliable sex difference. So this idea that women are more talkative than men is not true according to this study. And again, this was done in multiple different countries, so it's not even like it was a small sample size. And you can look at these sample sizes down here and see. Just a second, I'll be able to click it. The sample sizes down here and see they had pretty large sample sizes overall. There was a great deal of variability. Some people spoke as few as 4,000 words and some spoke as many as 40,000 words. But again, most of us would probably have no idea if people that there's no gender difference and that people speak hundreds or thousands of words per day. 16,000 words a day. Do you even imagine speaking 16,000 words a day? I know on days I'm lecturing, I speak way more than 16,000 words, but at the same time, even on days where I'm not lecturing, I speak quite a bit. Let's look at another example. It's really hard to read this, but the authors investigated the role of homosexual arousal in exclusively heterosexual men who admitted negative affect toward homosexual individuals. Participants consisted of a group of homophobic men and a group of non-homophobic men. So men who claim to dislike gay men and men who claim to not dislike gay men. They were assigned to groups on the basis of their scores on the index of homophobia. The men were exposed to sexually explicit erotic stimuli consisting of heterosexual, male, homosexual, and lesbian videotapes, and changes in penile circumference were monitored. So that's one way they can measure arousal, by the way, is with a penile gauge, and it basically is a gauge that measures how much blood flow or erection forms in the penis. Both groups exhibited increases in penile circumference to the heterosexual and female homosexual videos. Only the homophobic men showed an increase in penile erection to male homosexual stimuli. The groups did not differ in aggression. Homophobia is apparently associated with homosexual arousal that the homophobic individual either unaware of or denies. So if you ask people with a self-report, are they attracted to gay men? Or are they attracted to homosexual sex? In this case, the homophobic men would say no. Their self-report would be no. But when you actually have an observational measure, a behavioral measure, that we know from multiple studies that increase in blood flow to the penis is associated with arousal. And so there was more arousal, or there was arousal to the homosexual encounters, to the homosexual videos. So again, different than the self-report, you're actually, with this behavioral or observational measure, you're able to say that this is different than their self-report, that these homophobic men are actually having homosexual arousal. So the big take-home point with all of this, with that interesting one at the end, I like to throw in an interesting one occasionally, but the interesting one at the end is, although self-reports of behavior will always have an important role in psychology, often more direct measures of behavior and physiology, like that last one, will remain crucial too. So this gets us to the end. So we defined surveys, questionnaires, and polls. We compared and contrasted the different question formats. We looked at utilizing the techniques to writing well-worded questions. Man, I got to rewrite that because it's just not able. I'm not able to read it. And then we explained why participants give inaccurate responses and looked at techniques to get participants to accurately respond. Thanks. Come on back.